Hello, I'm Kimberley Hoeppner with Alaska Weather. Today is August 7th, 2018. We've been in a very active weather pattern, and we're going to be on in just a moment to your public aviation and marine forecast. Remember, you can always get our forecast by dialing 1-800-472-0391 or going to our website at weather.gov/Alaska and clicking on the destination of your choice. We always like your feedback, and you can provide that by writing an email to david.snider@noaa.gov. That's our TV desk lead, and he would be happy to answer any of your questions. Now let's go on to the interesting topics of the day. I'm going to actually step off your screen for just a moment as we take a look at this photo, which is provided by the courtesy of the McLaren River Lodge. They had seen some river rises with rainfall totals between 3 to 5 inches during the last 24 hours, and rivers are on the rise to bank full. So be sure, if you're a recreator, that you're not parking too close to those banks. Those are going to be the main concerns, are those river rises out there. So let's go on and look at the watches and advisories that are out there. First, we'll cover the watches that are out to the southeast. If you look over here, we do have rivers that are going to be on the rise because for the next 24 hours, we're going to see the excessive rainfall moving into the southeast. So therefore, we're looking at the Taya River at the lower elevations, not as much rain, more so in the higher elevations near Skagway. And then we will be seeing the Mendenhall Lake area at the lower elevations receiving between 4 to 6 inches of rain through the next 24 hours. So be aware, there is a watch out for that, and that's going to be running through Thursday night for those higher river levels and around Mendenhall Lake. Also, we do have rivers that were on the rise across the Susitna Valley and along the Denali Highway, which creeps up into the northwestern part of the Copper River Basin location. So that's why this entire area is highlighted. So this is an advisory that's out through at least Thursday morning for area rivers on the rise. And then we also have the Tanana River that's going to be on the watch through the next 24 hours until we get through Thursday night, possibly for the rivers along the Tanana near Fairbanks. Now let's move on and take a look at the fire danger. This is the only map that I have that there is nothing on, because with all the rainfall across the state, the cooler temperatures, higher relative humidities, there are no fire concerns at this time. Now here is the satellite map. So I'm going to put this into motion so we can see the moisture path, where it's heading over here towards the southeast. The center of low pressure, you can see that clearing right behind the low pressure system. So the frontal boundary is now oriented across the central and eastern areas of the Gulf of Alaska, and that's streaming up towards Yakutat, which has already received 3 inches of rainfall. All the areas across the Susitna Copper River average between 1/2 inch to 1 inch in the lower elevations, with the areas more prone to rainfall seeing between 1 to 3 inches, higher amounts up to 5 inches. So certainly has been a lot of rainfall across the area. Cooler air mass is coming around behind this low pressure system, and we'll get to your aviation section, analyze a little bit more of these upper levels, but basically we have a broad upper low that spans from the northern waters all the way to the Gulf, and out towards the west we have another low pressure system that's moving up to the western and central Aleutians, and this is another warm, very tropical type of situation. And then in between this we just have very weak ridging and low clouds trapped under that ridge. So at the surface, here we go, we have low pressure with a frontal boundary to the west, not any major impacts yet, but this is going to have some easterly winds accompanying it. And then across the southern areas of the state, we're already seeing some winds picking up ahead of this front. So southerly winds 30 miles per hour, gusting up to 45 miles per hour. As you head through the evening hours and overnight, those winds will continue to gust with that rain moving into the southeast. Now we have some wraparound moisture continuing with some thunderstorms actually expanding from the eastern areas of the Copper River back over towards the Susitna basin there. We are seeing some thunderstorms develop in the Susitna. So be on the lookout for that to continue through the evening hours. And then lower impact tonight across the north and northwest, just some light rain, some developing low pressure systems not really formed out there yet, but we will see a pickup of light rain as we head through the overnight hours. Low pressure across the Gulf will continue to spin, not really changing its strength or anything. It's just going to sit with all that moisture moving towards the southeast direction, and that's going to be what's going to cause the rainfall between 3 to 6 inches as we head through the next 24 hours. Looking out towards the west, low pressure system is slowly advancing, but ridging in between is kind of keeping this next system from moving very quickly. So we'll mainly have patchy fog across the Bering with some stronger northerly flow between 20 to 35 miles per hour across the Alaska Peninsula and along the west coast. Looking for your Wednesday weather to continue to be a very wet and foggy pattern out across the Bering, with some gusty winds continuing for the southeast and gusty winds also across the backside of this low pressure system. On the backside of the system between 20 to 35 miles per hour out of the north direction, mainly an offshore flow pattern, but light across the interior. And then across the northern interior of the state, we do have slightly colder temperatures east of Dead Horse with a little bit colder air mass. You might see some snow showers out in that direction. Across the western areas of the state, just some light rain with low pressure developing along the Bering Strait. As we head into your Thursday, expect drier conditions setting up across the interior, with the southeast beginning to taper off, but thunderstorms will continue to be a concern across the eastern areas of the Gulf, and we'll see some heavier showers also across the southeast continue. Across the west, this low starts to advance, but we have high pressure that's going to be slowing this system speed down as we head to the end of the week. Now for temperatures for Wednesday morning, expect temperatures near 50 all across the Gulf coastal locations, slightly warmer in the Panhandle with temperatures in the mid-50s. Across the interior, the morning temperatures are going to be in the upper 40s to near 50. The northern interior of the state down near freezing across the eastern parts of the the eastern Beaufort Sea coast with 40s across the northwest. Towards the Bering, temperatures uniformly in the upper 40s. Looking at your Wednesday afternoon, warmer across the interior in the upper 50s to mid 60s, and also across the southern interior of the state, we'll see temperatures near 60 and approaching 70 towards Annette or the southern or the Dixon entrance. Now across the north, temperatures warming in the mid 40s to lower 30s. That's hard to say during the summer, lower 30s, but that's where they're going to be back down on Thursday morning with the warmer temperatures across the lower parts of the state in lower 50s to mid 50s, and the Bering and Alaska Peninsula, Aleutian Chain are going to be in the 40s. So as we head through your Thursday afternoon, slight warming trends across the southern will bring you up into the mid 60s for the afternoon hours, as well as across the southeast, slightly cooler in the upper channels there in the mid 70s. Across the northern interior of the state, back up into the upper 30s to mid 40s for your afternoon on Thursday. And then the Bering will see slightly warmer temperatures in the mid to upper 50s. Thanks for staying with us, and we'll be right back with your aviation weather.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Now on to your flying weather across the state. We're looking at widespread MVFR and IFR conditions. Looking first at the northern interior of the state, we have IFR across the Brooks Range and north along the coast, with MVFR conditions spread across the western areas of the state for the most part, and widespread conditions also across the Bering. A little bit of a breaking point there across the southwest. However, the Alaska Range back towards the Aleutian Ranges, we're going to be seeing MVFR and IFR conditions. Also for the south, expect MVFR to IFR conditions to start your day for Wednesday. Now taking a look later on Wednesday, we are going to see some thunderstorm possibilities across the northeastern Gulf up there through the Alcan border. look for conditions to possibly move a little bit further east than this. There is some uncertainty still on where that low pressure is going to be precisely. Now, IFR and MVFR conditions will continue across the eastern areas of the Gulf waters. However, interior locations will see a bit of VFR except along the southern and the northern ranges. However, the north coast will improve just slightly to MVFR conditions instead of the IFR. Now for the west coast, continuing in those MVFR conditions with some breaks south of the Kuskokwim Delta down towards part of the Alaska Peninsula. However, we will see a bit of a broken MVFR condition for the peninsula and widespread IFR conditions continuing out to the west. Now let's take a look on your Thursday morning. We'll see very similar conditions. IFR conditions begin to spread a little bit further back towards the west coast, so look for the Kuskokwim Delta MVFR conditions for your Thursday morning. And then across the western Gulf, a little bit of clearing for Kodiak, and along the western waters across the interior, we'll start the day with the VFR conditions. IFR and MVFR conditions still continuing across the north coast for the morning on Thursday. And then we'll see also widespread MVFR and IFR conditions for the eastern Gulf waters and along the southeast. Look for conditions being in the MVFR range across the Alaska range, and along the eastern Alcan border there, IFR conditions to start out your day during the afternoon. Developing thunderstorms, again possible in the northeastern Gulf water locations and east. Look for MVFR conditions mostly across the southeast with some IFR conditions along the mountains. We'll see mostly VFR along the central areas of the state, and we'll see improving conditions across the Brooks Range, mainly MVFR conditions along the north coast. Along the west coast, some MVFR conditions with possible thunderstorms up by the Seward Peninsula. We'll see widespread IFR conditions and MVFR conditions for much of the Bering. A little bit of improvement there along the Alaska Peninsula. Let's take a look at your passes now in more depth. We'll see Anahtuvik Pass go from IFR to MVFR late day, as well as Adigan, IFR to MVFR. And we'll see Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, IFR improving to MVFR during late day. Rainy will also have the same trend, IFR to MVFR. And we'll see windy MVFR conditions all day, as well as Isabel. And we'll include Mentasta with that MVFR condition, and Tanita will stay MVFR. MVFR conditions for Portage and IFR conditions for Chilkoot and White Pass. Now let's take a look at your freezing levels. There off the coast is the surface freezing level, and then we'll see 2,000 to 6,000 foot rises across the state, and then 8,000 to 12,000 across the Gulf waters, and out there across the Bering between 6,000 and 12,000 feet. Let's take a look at your icing. Main concerns across a developing low across the Bering Strait, out towards the west with a new low moving in, and the low developing across the eastern waters of the Gulf. Let's take a look at the systems that are developing. We are currently going from a zonal pattern to a more amplified pattern, with low pressure being the new amplified pattern across the Gulf and along the northwestern areas of the state. The low pressure currently in charge is going to be slipping to the south. So behind that we have another low pressure system, so a little bit of an amplified ridge ahead of the low pressure out across the western waters. Now we'll see 9,000 foot winds, a speed max across the eastern areas of the Bering, 20 to 30 knots. Lighter wind speeds across the mainland, with the main concern ahead of this low pressure between 30 to 45 knots across the southeast. This reflects at the 3,000 foot level around the low pressure system. Light winds across the interior, however, southwest and southeast, 30 to 45 knots. And we'll see the Bering fairly quiet for your Wednesday. Wednesday, main concerns, Alaska Peninsula, out to the west, and also across the southeast.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York. and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms, why they occurred. The distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region. The rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense in what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. Well, one of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors. big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Now it's time to take a look at your marine weather. We're first going to talk about the ice edge, and the main concerns are across the northern coast is that we do have some ice that's been there longer than normal for this season, and with a northerly push as we head through the next few days, that might head back and push towards the coastal area. So like I said, the main concern is actually the ice edge hanging on and being a little bit closer to the coastal areas for this time of the year. Now, as we head back towards the southeast, looking at your forecast for Wednesday, strong southerly flow will be a small craft advisory day for you, with lots of rain moving into the area, gusts up to 40 to 45 knots across those inner channels. Seas will be between 3 to 6 feet, and then 7 to 9 feet for the outer waters. Thursday, a little bit better day on the wind side, with 10 to 25 knots of wind, strongest across or as you head towards the southern Dixon entrance, or the outer waters are going to be a little bit lighter. Speeds are going to be from the south and southwest directions, inner channels between 3 to 5 feet for your seas, and your outer waters will be between 5 to 6 feet. Now let's take a look at the north and western areas of the Gulf. Wind speeds are going to vary at 10 knots, with the strongest winds across the southern tip of the Kenai out of the west to northwest direction, and then speeds across the Cook Inlet at 10 knots, and then 2 feet for the seas across the inlet areas and Prince William Sound, and 4 to 7 feet mainly across the Gulf waters, and 9 feet near Amatui Island and west there. So let's take a look at your Thursday forecast. Those strong winds hanging on now the north and west directions, with offshore flow 10 knots. Main concerns are going to be the seas between 7 to 10 feet out there at the southern tip of the Kenai to Kodiak Island. Now let's take a look at your Alaska Peninsula forecast, and around Kodiak Island, expecting winds out of the north and west direction between 20 to 25 knots, so be on the lookout for small crafts in these locations, and then 5 to 6 foot seas across the Bering side, and 5 to 7 feet across the Shelikof Island and Pacific side. Now let's look at your Thursday forecast. A little bit of a wind directional change around the Alaska Peninsula, and then primarily a west to northwest direction prevailing across the eastern peninsula and over Kodiak Island. Small craft advisories out there south of the Alaska Peninsula and near Kodiak. And we're going to see seas on this day 2 to 3 feet across the Bering side, and then along the Pacific side between 5 to 6 feet. Looking at your Aleutian chain, let me just step off your screen here so you can see winds are going to be primarily from the east direction, a little bit more change of direction across the areas for the eastern Aleutians. So we have a northerly flow and then changing easterly. So we do have some small craft advisories out there for the eastern and central Aleutians, and seas on this day are going to be between 5 to 9 feet with the highest seas out towards the west. Heading into your Thursday forecast, looking at primarily a small craft day across the Aleutian chain with another change of wind directions around low pressure approaching the area. And then we'll see seas between 5 to 9 feet again. And then the west coast, we're looking at winds to be a little bit lighter in this region out of the west direction, mainly becoming south when you get south of the Pribilof Islands. And we'll see seas between 2 to 5 feet. And then on Thursday, not much change, lighter wind speeds for the west coast between 4 to 6 feet out to the west, and then along the north and northwest coast, we're looking at 5 to 15 knots. The strongest winds along the west coast, and then around the Seward Peninsula, seas on this day will be 3 to 4 feet in open water. Now on your Thursday, not much change, just a little bit stronger winds as you head towards the Kotzebue Sound there. We'll see between 3 to 5 foot seas. Let's recap your forecast. We will see low pressure moving to the southeast, bring some heavy rainfall through the next 24 hours. Be on the watch out for river rises and Mendenhall Lake, as we're going to see rainfall between 3 to 6 inches. We'll see wraparound rain showers during the overnight hours for the Copper River Basin and the Susitna Valley, all areas across South Central. Now to the north and northwest, some lighter rain and also snow showers up there towards the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. While in the meanwhile, the Bering is going to be mostly under rain to the west and then foggy and showers across the eastern and central waters. Lighter wind speeds will pick up across the Alaska Peninsula for your Wednesday, with that rain continuing through Thursday for the southeast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.